Hello, and welcome back to the Irish Tennis Updates podcast. My name is Adam, your host. This week I have been talking to Claire Curran. Claire had a huge amount of success in tennis, both as an Irish tennis player and as a British tennis player. She now lives in the UK, where she still works a lot in tennis, both in media and in the coaching side of the sport. This episode is in two parts, and this is part one. This episode, we talk about Claire's current work in tennis, her early days in tennis, how she got into the sport. We also talk about her junior days, and we talk about her time in US college when she went to Berkeley, and how that experience was, and how she found those years in US college. Towards the end of the episode, Claire discusses winning the NCAA championships in doubles in her final year, and how that led to a wild card for that year's US Open in 2000. And the episode ends with Claire talking about that match in the US Open, where she drew Martina Hingis and Mary Pierce, and had a great match with them. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you do, please make sure to tune in again next week for part two of this great chat with Claire Curran. Here we go. Here is part one, and here is Claire Curran. All right, Claire, a big thanks for coming on for a chat today. How are you doing?
Well, Adam, thanks very much for having me on. And I have to say, to be honest with you, I'm always looking for great podcasts to listen to. I particularly like listening to anything tennis related, and I was delighted that you got in contact with me, because it gave me the opportunity, obviously, to tune into the podcast, and I've really enjoyed listening to actually what is now becoming quite a lot of interviews that you've done with various people through Irish tennis. I think it's brilliant. I've enjoyed actually, particularly listening to former, especially Fed Cup teammates of mine, and listening to their journey and the similarities that we've had kind of throughout it. And I just think it's fantastic what you're doing. So thanks very much for having me on.
Well, great. No, brilliant. Thanks very much. And just to start, Claire, I know that obviously we're coming into kind of to Wimbledon time, and which I'm sure is a busy time for people involved in British tennis, like yourself. So just tell me a bit about the work you're doing at the moment, obviously this time of year, and just kind of generally how you are with tennis at the moment.
Well, actually, unfortunately, I'm not so busy during Wimbledon with any work for the LTA. It's actually more media commitments. So I work during Wimbledon for Radio Wimbledon and the Wimbledon channel. So that's pretty much full time, 2 weeks of completely covering every single court, whether it's court one, centre, backcourts. But it's just really being around Wimbledon and the whole experience, and then obviously broadcasting that. On the other side of my life, I have a little bit of a media role at the moment. Just throughout the year, I do quite a lot of commentary for the WTA Tour and also the ATP Tour. But I also am a consultant for the LTA on the women's team. So I guess I would be a national women's senior coach. So I have had this year quite a big role in the development of one of Britain's junior players. Actually, she's not junior anymore. She's 20 years of age. She's a girl called Francesca Jones, and she's going to be playing actually in her first Wimbledon this year, just actually in a couple of days. So I actually case manage Fran Jones, and that's kind of a role of overseeing, I guess, the large investment that the LTA put into her, and it's just overseeing where that money's going, how it's being spent, the team that she has around her, helping her to kind of put together the right team, and also hopefully using a little bit of my own kind of tennis coaching knowledge and kind of directing her in the right way. It's actually, to be honest with you, it's actually been a role this year that I've spent a lot more time on the court with her than I would have envisioned. But that's really been a result of COVID and the fact that she's been based in the UK a lot this year and not in Barcelona, where her training kind of base is. So I spent a lot of time doing that, and I also have taken on this year, although I'm at the beginning stages of it, trying to put together a little bit of a strategy for the LTA in regards to how we're going to look to be supporting players that are in American college, not just when they're over there, but also potentially when they come out of college. And that's something that's very close to my heart, because I spent 4 years in that American system and I think it's a big area of which the LTA can do better with. And I know that Tennis Ireland is very, very interested in it, and they acknowledge that this is a big aspect of tennis development that they need to focus on. So I think the LTA needs to follow suit with that as well. And then I also do quite a lot of work with British doubles players, the female doubles players. So I'm quite busy at the moment, but it's everything that I'm doing are projects that I really love to do. So it doesn't feel like hard work for me at all.
Yes, yeah, no, that's great. And I do remember watching Fran Jones back in Australian Open when she kind of qualified for that, and that was brilliant. And then in terms of the commentary, obviously that's great to be doing that in Wimbledon, maybe more so. How did that all start for you, getting into media after you stopped playing?
Well, actually, it didn't start immediately after I stopped playing. The tennis coaching career was what really kind of took off after I stopped playing. But I always had a real interest in the media. But I also, I'm a tennis fan. I watch a lot of tennis whenever I'm not working in tennis. I feel like I was a little bit of a kind of tennis encyclopedia, but I've realized I probably don't know as much as you do, Adam. But I think that if you love the game, then obviously, and you have an opportunity to get involved in the media, then that was one that I had to take. But it was also because when I first had my children, my coaching career, which at that point was very much based on the tour, working with the top British female tennis players, I was no longer traveling on the tour, so I wasn't at Grand Slams anymore. And I think that being involved in the commentary has been an excellent way for me to keep in touch with the standards and the levels of the game, the very top level of the game. So it was something that I made a couple of calls. I specifically actually contacted Wimbledon to begin with, and they were very, very keen to get me involved on the Wimbledon channel and Radio Wimbledon, which I think has a pretty high following listening wise around the world. And it's, to be honest with you, it's absolutely fabulous. It's kind of the best 2 weeks. It's a great team and we all enjoy ourselves, and it's pretty good to get to watch a lot of tennis at the same time. And then from there, I just you just word of mouth, you send a couple of emails and people start to make contact with you. So it's kind of gone a little bit. It's gone from there, but I'm very conscious that I'm still a coach at heart, and I try to make sure that I keep that balance at the right level at the moment. Yeah.
And would you have any kind of most exciting moments or most kind of nervous moments as a commentator commentating matches on Wimbledon or elsewhere?
I think the first moments were without a doubt the most nerve-wracking ones. And I think it was 4 years ago when I started with Radio Wimbledon. And I was absolutely green beforehand, and you're preparing, you're trying to prepare as much as you can in terms of all the notes that you're taking. You're trying to go in there, with that element of preparation, but you're kind of going into unfamiliar territory. And I still have a lot of nerves doing it. I think that's important to have that, to kind of be on the edge with it. And I'm still learning a lot. I'm very lucky to have in Radio Wimbledon, and also especially working on the ATP Tour, there's a couple of producers that are not short of giving you advice, which I think is really important. And I'm still a work in progress, that's for sure.
Yeah. And I want to come back in a little bit to touch on kind of the coaching work that you're doing and you have done, I guess, since you stopped playing. But to bring you back a little bit, Claire, how did tennis start for you, and how did you kind of get into it and start to play kind of a bit more and start competing, and how was all that for you?
I think it was, I was the youngest of 4 children growing up in Belfast, which isn't exactly a mecca of tennis players. But I had 2 parents who I would say they enjoyed playing tennis, but more than anything, they enjoyed socializing at the tennis club. And in those days, there was very strict rules that kids weren't allowed in the bar. So there was only really one thing to do, and that was to go out onto the tennis courts. And I think I was particularly lucky because I was the youngest of 4. So I always had, my brothers and my sisters to play tennis with. And I think I just absolutely loved it. There was no question of that. But I was also, I think at a young age, I was very, very aware of tennis on TV, particularly Wimbledon. And when you're watching something and you see something, I guess, that beautiful, that spectacular centre court at Wimbledon, you start to dream of one day being there. And I remember really from a very young age hitting the ball against the wall and thinking, one day I'm going to be doing this, at Wimbledon. And I think those types of thoughts, they make you hit a lot more. They keep you out there for 100 more or 200 more. But I think that my mum would say that it was obvious that I had this ability, the sporting ability. And I think it was really kind of, at that time, no matter kind of what sport I was playing, I was doing quite well at it. And I think she thought that I was much more sporty than academic as well. So she was very happy to kind of pursue that focus for me. And it just took off actually quite quickly, Adam. I played a tournament to start with at Cave Hill Club in Belfast. There was 4 people in that tournament, under 10. I won that tournament, and then I would have gone on to play at the Belfast Boat Club, the Ulster Championships. And I guess I was doing quite well. And I think when you're a kid, especially at that age, and you're winning, you're going to want to do more, aren't you? It's a kind of natural thing. So I kept playing, and I then remember my parents took me to my first tournament down south at Donnybrook, under 11. And that was a totally new ball game for me, because there was a lot more players then. And I was a little bit, you're nervous. I didn't know the environment at all. I lost in the final of that tournament to Yvonne Flynn, who was my great rival, under 12. She was a year older than me, but she was a great rival and a very good friend. But from then it just kind of snowballed to playing in the Irish Open under 12. And that was a massive tournament for me. And actually, I think probably even today, if I was to kind of pick what were your best kind of tennis moments, I think winning Fitzwilliam under 12 in 1989, where I hit a forehand cross-court winner against Yvonne Flynn in that final. And I'm sorry if she's listening that she kind of knows that I'm bringing that up. I think that was probably one of the most important moments in my young journey, because it felt so big. It felt massive. And I was very lucky actually in my kind of junior career that I had a lot of success at the Irish Open in Fitzwilliam. I remember that year looking at kind of the boards and seeing all the champions of all the age groups and realizing that nobody had won the under 12s, the under 14s, the under 16s, and the under 18s. And I think at the same year, it might have been the year later, Stuart Doyle was playing in the under 18s, and he had actually won 12s, 14s, 16s. And Stuart was a great player. He was about to go to Arkansas on a tennis scholarship, but his big rival was Scott Barron. And Scott had been improving a lot. He'd been playing, I think, getting into kind of playing professional tennis. He'd been on the ITF circuit. But Stuart, I think, was the number 1 seed. And he was going to, for me, he was about to do it. He was about to win all 4 titles. And he dislocated his knee either the first day of the tournament or the week after. And I remember thinking, gosh, what is it about trying to do this? This must be such a, it really stuck with me. I thought maybe there's an omen on trying to do that. But when I won the under 12s, my goal kind of was to try to win all of the age groups. And I was able to do that. And actually, I think when I was winning the age groups, I was always winning them a year young or even a year out of the age group. So, that's tennis kind of took off for me at a young age, but I think it certainly helps whenever you're doing well.
Yeah, no, for sure. Now, it's good to have kind of stories and memories like that from those days, and obviously the success that you had. And I guess as you then grew up and kind of you got a bit older and kept winning, now you moved to Dublin, to where you kind of trained and lived. So how was that? And then I guess going abroad, like Junior Wimbledon, all those, how was it then as you got more competitive, traveling around as well for your tennis?
Yes, I was very lucky at the time when I was kind of much younger than I moved to Dublin. And I don't think everybody would have had the same experience. But for me, I was myself and Karen Nugent, George McGill, were certainly very lucky that in the sense that time, Matt Doyle had become the Irish national coach. And I guess Matt's strategy was that firstly, he was able to get quite a lot of sponsorship because he had friends in high places as such. But I think his strategy was, look, we're going to pick a couple of people who we really think have this, strong ability, and we're going to invest, a lot in them. And I think for me and for Curran in particular, that was fantastic. I think for a lot of the other players, that was probably very, very difficult, because we got a lot of investment in our tennis at a very young age. National squads were quite big at the time, and we were able to go to those national squads from Belfast, getting onto the train, going down to Dublin, and there was just the investment really kind of helped. When I was 13, Matt had spoken to my parents and said that she's going to need to go. She's going to need to come to Dublin. And at that time, when I was 13 years of age, I was the #1 senior player in Ulster. I was playing interprovincials at 13, and I loved being at home. There's nothing that I loved more. I had wonderful coaches at home. I had a great environment at the Belfast Boat Club. I found the traveling very, very difficult as a tennis player, but I had this absolute love for the game of tennis. And I always struggled to kind of reconcile those two things, loving the game, but not loving the life of a tennis player. So when Matt said to my parents that I was going to, I was going to have to come and live in Dublin, that, if I'm honest with you, Adam, that broke my heart. It was a very, very difficult thing for me to do. And I actually won the under-16 Irish Fitzwilliam title when I was under 14. And when I won that title on the Saturday afternoon, I drove home that night knowing that on the Sunday I was driving back to Dublin to live with a family that I didn't know and go to a school that I knew nobody kind of in. And I just won the Irish under-16 title, and I'm crying my eyes out in the back of the car. It was, if I could say it, I would say probably it felt quite traumatic for me to kind of do that, but it was what I had to do. So I went to Dublin. I lived with a family in Donnybrook, and I trained at the all the national squads, particularly under Matt Doyle, when I was 14, doing my junior cert in third year. And at weekends I would go back home, and it was tough. It was very, very tough. I think that in kind of retrospect, whether I could have gone to a boarding school, that might have made a little bit of a difference. But yeah, it was a big change for me. And I think also for a kid from Northern Ireland in those days, I was going up and down on the train to Dublin, and often you'd be taken off that train for bomb scares and kind of different things. There was an awful lot kind of going on at the time. But as I said, it was kind of what I had to do if I wanted to kind of take my tennis to the next level. So for the first 2 years being in Dublin and training under Matt Doyle was brilliant. There was no question about it. My game was improving an awful lot. At 15, I made the Irish Fed Cup team, which I think I'm pretty sure I'm the youngest ever player to play for Ireland. And that was like a dream come true, to be able to get on that Fed Cup team at 15 with Karen Nugent and Gina Nyland and Siobhan Nicholson. Was so special for me. But my by the time I got to about 15 and a half, 16, Matt Doyle was leaving Tennis Ireland. And he said to me, you need to go to the States. You need to go now. You're not going to grow anymore as the player. And I, at that point, I didn't make that decision to go to America. I was scared, if I'm honest with you. I was scared of leaving, making another step away, and doing, just doing that. So I stayed put for the next 2 years in Ireland, did my leaving cert, but my game wasn't growing at all. I wasn't developing. I was very aware of that at 15, I felt that I was actually, in terms of a tennis player internationally, I was pretty good. I possibly had a shot at being kind of a top, like, I don't know whether it would have been a top 100 player, top 50 player, but at that point I was kind of felt on track. By the time I got to 17, I didn't believe in myself really at all. I didn't see myself being inside the top 200 in the world without a huge amount of more investment. And yeah, if I probably could go back, I would maybe think about those kind of years a little bit differently. But the tennis wasn't fantastic, but the journey of playing tennis in Ireland and the friends that I made, those were all very, very special to me, and memories that I would kind of have kind of forever. They were very, very important. And I really enjoyed all of the other aspects to tennis as well.
Yeah. Now, kind of, it strikes me, even as you're saying that it's kind of a series of those difficult decisions at the right times that kind of can keep the development going as it's needed. So, and obviously you said how traumatic it was moving to Dublin, and then maybe you didn't move to the States initially, and then like you did go obviously for college afterwards. Like, do you think there could be, or there should be, another way that you can develop without having to move and make it so difficult? Like, would it be possible almost to have a system where that wasn't so necessary, or is that kind of just part and parcel of how to develop players sort of in a system like this?
Look, I think that what you need a lot of you need a lot of money to develop tennis players. I mean, tennis is not cheap, and today's tennis is a lot more expensive than it was in my day. I mean, when I look at the team surrounding, even Fran Jones, you're talking about physiotherapists, you're talking about strength and conditioning coaches, obviously dietitians, sports psychologists, hitting partners. It's the money that is involved to be a tennis player is just extraordinary. So I think that's probably one of the kind of first things you kind of need. But I think that what was difficult in my case was that my family weren't with me. And I think it depends on your age. I follow a lot Georgia Drummy, and I think it's great what she's doing. I was so happy to see her a couple of years ago playing in Junior Wimbledon. And her father, Victor Drummy, actually took me on one of my first trips under 14. So I think she's got in her parents, she's got very wise people that kind of know the system and the structure. And I know she went out to the States when she was 16 years of age. Now, 16 is a lot different than 14, especially, for a girl. You're more mature at that point. And I think maybe that may be a very kind of good call for her. She went to a great academy with good kind of people around her. And then she was able to have that exposure to the top level of the game, because I think that's really important. I think that's something with which I never really had as a kid. I didn't have exposure to top players, the very best coaches. I didn't really know what standard I was trying to make. I just saw it on TV. And I think for kids growing up, you need to kind of understand the standards. That's kind of so important. And I think just have a very strong set of parents that understand the system as well and kind of stick with you in that. And in terms of, do you need to go away from home? I don't know, because I don't know enough about what happens in Irish tennis from a perspective of the coaches and the system, I guess, there. But I would say that you would need to get out of Ireland to see the level and the standards that are going on around the world, and whether that's just playing tournaments or going to places for training, whether it's that way, whether you have to do the complete move, I don't know that 100%.
Yeah. Is there any kind of regret that you have that you didn't go earlier, and when that Matt said it, or do you think that you're happy with the kind of the journey you had, and it was too tough a move to make?
I'm okay with the decision that I made. When I think about Andy Murray, I think when he was 15, he said to his mom, "I need to go to Spain," and I think that's the difference between the two of us. He was that I need to do that to get to that next level. I obviously didn't want it enough. It was, and whether or not that was because my experiences at a young age already were I was maybe too exposed or too lonely, or I had maybe the younger experiences. Maybe in retrospect, those maybe could have been a little bit. I could have been a little bit more protected from them. So no, I don't regret it, and I think that one of the things that I'm particularly pleased about was that I was able to stay in full-time education. And that was something that anybody that knew me at that time would know that I didn't go to school that much. I would have said that, if there was a regret that I would have, it was that I looked at myself from a very young age because I was going to be a tennis player. And I didn't, I don't think I valued my education enough at a young age. And I was given a bit of a lifeline because I ended up getting a scholarship to UC Berkeley, which ironically is probably one of the most academic universities, public schools in the country. And I was able to do that because, like many others, Peter Wright, who's the men's coach there, he actually always came to the tournament in Belfast, and that was because his granny lived just beside the tennis club, so he always made that trip. And so I knew him from a young age, and he then took me to the Orange Bowl when I was about 17, and he said to me, "You should think about American colleges." And I thought, "Oh no, who's gone to those? You couldn't do that." And then he obviously spoke to the head coach on the women's team at Berkeley and said, "This girl, she can play singles and doubles." And I'm sure that coach kind of thought, "She's Irish. We haven't had a lot of Irish kind of players." But it was the fact that I could play singles and doubles that interested them. So I basically, the last 5 months of school in Dublin, I think I crammed 3 years of work into 5 months, and I got myself through that leaving cert. I don't know how I did that, but I got myself through it. I got what I needed to get to Berkeley, and then I had this opportunity, not just a second chance at my education, but also this incredible opportunity to have this exposure to, the most elite level of sport that I can could even imagine.
Yeah. And just a couple of points just from earlier on, just before we move on to the kind of the college experience for you. Do you think that, obviously you mentioned that you were one of kind of the small number of players who got a lot of the investment from kind of Tennis Ireland. Was there a lot of pressure that you felt from that, or did that not really kind of register with you at the time of that sort of pressure that came from that?
I think that I didn't feel pressure that I needed to go out and and do these kind of amazing things. But I think that I was aware that I was probably getting more than other people, and I don't know whether or not that makes you really popular. I don't, in that sense, and it wasn't. I guess it wasn't my fault, that if that makes sense. It was just the way it was. I mean, I would have preferred to have lived in my family house and go to my school in Belfast and be able to play tennis than have to get on the, to be kind of taken away from home so early. But Tennis Ireland, funded that entire investment in me, which was, at that time, and even now, I'm sure when people kind of look back on that's very, very, very unique. And I'm very, very grateful that they did that. But I'm sure that there would have probably been other kids at the time, certainly other parents at the time that maybe would have seen it in a different way.
Yeah. And just another point is just on junior Wimbledon, because you mentioned that like Wimbledon, you kind of had those dreams of playing at Wimbledon someday, and I guess, as we'll say later, you did, at a senior level, after that. But how was the junior Wimbledon experience of playing there, and just being there and playing?
Well, gosh. So that was the summer of 1996, and to get to junior Wimbledon, you had to travel around the world and play a lot of ITF junior tournaments. And at that point, I think even in the summer of 1994, I took a trip out to Bratislava by myself, which as a 16-year-old without a mobile phone was a pretty tough thing to do. Bratislava for a week, and then I took a train up to Hungary, where I met a coach, Jenny O'Brien, who traveled with me for the next 2 weeks to those tournaments. So I kind of had got this real taste of what being a tennis player was like, and I found it very, very hard. If I'd say but I did it. I went away from home for Christmas days for 2 years to play those ITF kind of circuits in South America. And there was kind of like a huge sacrifice to try to get your ranking to get into kind of junior Wimbledon. And actually, 2 years before I got into Junior Wimbledon, Karen Nugent had actually made the quarterfinals of Junior Wimbledon, which even to this day, the girl that she lost to in the quarters went on to play the final. And Martina Hingis beat that girl in the final. But I think Karen was probably a couple of games away from making the final of Junior Wimbledon, really. So, I had this person who was 2 years older than me, who was kind of showing me the way a little bit, which I was very lucky to have. But for me, playing Junior Wimbledon was a dream come true. But at the time, it was very, very difficult because there had kind of been a personal, I guess, tragedy that had happened just in the day that I actually left for Wimbledon. And I think probably many people who listen to your podcast will obviously have known Gareth Parker, who was a tennis player from Northern Ireland but trained in Dublin. And very, very sadly, he died about a week before I went to Junior Wimbledon in what was kind of a very bad, I guess, a fight outside a bar in Belfast. So the day I left for Junior Wimbledon, I actually went to his funeral, and I couldn't really, I was there, but I wasn't really present. I found it. I thought there was a lot bigger things kind of in life than kind of tennis at that point. But also, I was just very, very sad that somebody from Northern Ireland who was so into tennis as well and so committed to it, something like that tragic could kind of happen to him. And I was kind of probably deeply affected by that during my time at Wimbledon that summer, but also actually probably for the really rest of the summer. It was a difficult time, I think, for everybody.
Yeah, no, that's really tough to have that. And I guess it does give you the kind of perspective when you go to Wimbledon that it isn't, as you said, there are more important things than the tennis.
Yeah, I think on the tennis court at Wimbledon, what I did realize, and I think this is probably the same, I think Gina Nyland said exactly the same thing, is that what you do when you haven't been on those courts, but you've watched it on TV, what you end up doing is you go onto the court and you just spend your time noticing all of you notice everything. You notice the Robinson signs, you notice the clocks on the walls, you notice the ivy, the ball boys, and your focus is completely and utterly away from actually trying to play a tennis match. And I wish, in hindsight, that I had have gone to Wimbledon more often as a kid to watch it and absorb the atmosphere, because that's all I did when I was on the court. I didn't perform particularly well either.
Yeah, and obviously in a little bit we can come on and kind of talk about when you got to go to Wimbledon again a few years later as a senior player. But firstly, you mentioned a little bit earlier on the US college going to Berkeley. So how was the tennis firstly? And obviously you said it was an academic university. So how was that kind of balance as well when you were over there?
It was tough. It was tough for me anyway. When I got there, it was a top 10 tennis school. And I had no idea what the NCAA's was. I didn't know when people were saying we're trying to win an NCAA championships. I was, oblivious to kind of all of this. But what I noticed straight away was that I was in an environment that academically people were really committed to their academics, but from a sports perspective, not just on my tennis team. I mean, I was on a tennis team that had the Australian number one, one of the top US players, the Hungarian number one. I mean, players that had all played in junior Grand Slams. And I was on this team with those people, but they were really committed to getting their education. So I wouldn't say that there was a great deal of kind of partying around the tennis and the academics. It was pretty much head down, and you worked hard, but it was exactly what I wanted, because I still wanted to be a professional tennis player when I went there. And I remember somebody saying to me, gosh, you're going to Berkeley, you've got a coach that's really like, she's a bit out of control. She's fairly intense. And, I remember thinking, but that's exactly what I want. I want a coach that's going to wake me up at 6 a.m. and go running with me or put us on a track, because those were all things that I was already doing, but I was doing them by myself. And to do them with a team was, it was exceptional. And the most amazing thing, I think, for me going to Berkeley was that obviously I've kind of said I didn't really like going away and different things like that. But from the first night that I got there, I didn't feel homesick once. And I'm pretty sure that's because I was part of a team. for the first time. And I think, team tennis wise on a daily basis, that everything we were doing, all our commitments, we were making for each other and for the team. And that had a huge influence on me then, and also even now, as kind of I went into the professional career and Fed Cups later on, that whole team environment and trying to become a number one team made just it actually became so important to me. But I think that the experience at Berkeley was we made the Final Four twice. We didn't win the team championships. I think we had an opportunity one year, and we kind of cracked under the pressure. But my final year at Berkeley was the year that I was able to win the NCAAs in doubles.
Right.
And that was, that was amazing. I can only say it was something that I worked really hard to try to achieve. And to be able to win that NCAAs with my partner Amy Jensen, to know that you're going to go to the US Open as an Irish tennis player and compete in New York. And I didn't know if I would ever play professional tennis after that. I didn't know what the future kind of held, but I knew that I would have played in a Grand Slam. And that was astonishing kind of for me. It's an incredible achievement. But I think at the time, not really many people in Ireland really knew what that was,
Yeah, and obviously, as you say, that does move into the US Open, and you got, I guess, a taste of Grand Slam tennis, probably a lot sooner than would have expected, because it kind of came straight from the NCA. So how was that match? I know you had a great match against Hingis and Pearce, obviously a tough first round draw, but how was that week for you and the match and the experience of Grand Slam tennis kind of quite early?
I've actually got a good story about that, which I'll kind of say, after this. Playing Hingis and Pearce in the first round of the US Open, and they had just won the French Open in doubles. Hingis was number one in the world. Pearce had just won the French Open in singles that year. I'd never been on court with a player inside the top 100 in the world. So to go on and play Hingis and Pearce was incredible. But I had also been in this environment for 4 years, the American environment, where really the expectation, anything is possible. I was no longer, a little kid from Belfast that hadn't had kind of much exposure to kind of the top level athletes. I'd been living with, Olympic swimmers, and I'd had much more of a taste of what real top level professional kind of sport was. And also, Amy and I, in winning the NCAAs, we were a really good team. You don't win that title if you're not good kind of players. And I would probably actually say that she was probably the strongest person that I actually ever played with, even going in as a professional after that. But yes, we went on court against them, and it was very, very special for me to have Ireland beside my name in New York. You can't kind of imagine what that kind of meant, but I hadn't really been part of Irish tennis for kind of quite a few years at the time, and I don't think even then, I don't really think even anybody from Tennis Ireland actually acknowledged it even at the time. So it was kind of a little bit strange, but I guess it didn't really matter. You just kind of went on and you played. And we were actually 5-1 up in the first set. And we weren't doing anything special. We were just doing the basics, cross courts we were 5-1 up. And I have this feeling that I really wanted to pass Mary Pearce down the line with my return. You don't know, I just thought I really want to put one past you. And I hit on set point, I hit the lowest percentage return of serve down the line that literally landed in the bottom of the net. It literally didn't even make the net. And that changed the course of the match. I wish if I had 1 point back in my life, I just went cross court with that return. We lost the game. I got broken in the next game. They held, and suddenly it was 5-4. And luckily, my doubles partner, Amy Jensen, had much stronger nerves than me. She held that set. That set, we won it 6-4, but we had lost the momentum of the match. And on paper, actually, we lost the next set 6-love, but we actually had 5 out of those next 6 games. We had game points. They were just mentally much, much tougher. And we lost the third set 6-1. But that moment did a couple of things for me. Firstly, it made me realize that I could play top level tennis. and
Yeah.
I thought I was pretty good at what I was doing. And secondly, and I think this was probably one of the other things that was very important to me, was that at that time I got $5,000 for my prize money, and it was my first event as a professional. I was no longer an amateur. But Tony O'Reilly, the former British and Irish Lion, who also, I guess, sponsored me as a kid, because he sponsored Tennis Ireland through Heinz. Tony O'Reilly was my dad's boss, because my dad was a newspaper editor and he owned the newspapers. And he had just before I was in New York, my dad had gone to the south of France to a kind of executives, weekend. And Tony O'Reilly made this kind of big speech about Ed's daughter was I think the first Irish woman, I think I was, but I'm not entirely sure, the first Irish woman to be competing at the US Open main draw. And he made this big speech about it. And then about 3 weeks after I got back to Berkeley, because I was still finishing my college academics, I got this check through the post from Heinz, from Tony O'Reilly, which was a check for $15,000. So with a note on it. So I think for me there was only one way I was going, and that was to kind of play professional tennis. But certainly the fact that I had $20,000 in my bank account when I finished university was a big help. And I think that that's something that he did for me that probably he's done for many other people, but would never ever say anything. It was a kind of pretty special story. But what I wanted to say to you about that match that we played in New York was that 17 years later, Martina Hingis, I'm sitting at Wimbledon, up in the players area, and it's very early in the morning, and I'm at the coffee bar getting a coffee, and Martina Hingis is standing beside me, and she's looking at me. She's just kind of looking at me, and I'm thinking she wants to say something to me, and she just looks at me and she says, "Do you remember that match?" And I kind of acted a little bit, oblivious. Well, of course I remember it. I have a shrine to it in my house in Belfast. And she said, "Do you remember that match?" And I said, "I remember that match." And I said, "I can't believe you remember it." And she said, "Oh yeah." I said to Mary, "We're getting our butts kicked. What are we going to do?" And I said to her, "You have just made my day. Actually, you've made my week, probably my month." But I thought it was a lovely story, because I mean, I can't remember who I played in the first round of, for her, it's probably the equivalent of, playing, the Irish Open, juniors first round. I can't remember some of the doubles matches. And for Hingis to kind of remember that, I thought that was pretty cool. But then I also thought maybe she's been told to say that. I don't know.
And that is it for part one. Do make sure to join us again next week for part two, where Claire talks a lot more about her pro tennis days. She talks about making the switch from representing Ireland to representing Great Britain, why that came about, how that period was for her. Claire also talks about finally achieving the Wimbledon dream. She talks about moving into the coaching after her playing days, and a lot more. I hope you enjoyed this part one. I certainly did. And I think if you did, you'll also love part two coming next week. A big thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Please do consider subscribing, leaving a review, leaving a rating, and sharing the podcast with anybody else that you think might also enjoy it. Until next week, until part two, that's all for now, and goodbye.